In Chapter 7, we traced paradigm changes that result when existing theory fails to solve the problems that the theory actually attempts to define. These failures, or crises, prompt the invention of new theories. Chapter 8 discusses how scientists respond to the anomaly and fit between theory and nature. In doing so, Kuhn also foreshadows how the process of paradigm shift takes place. Kuhn insists that normal science does and must continually strive to bring theory and fact into closer argument. He tells us that it is the recognition and acknowledgement of anomalies that results in crises, and that these crises are a necessary precondition for the emergence of novel theories and for paradigm change. Essentially, there's no such thing as research without counter-instances. These counter-instances, or anomalies, create tension and crisis. And crisis is always implicit in research because every problem that normal science sees as a puzzle can be seen from another viewpoint as a counter-instance, and thus as a source of crisis. Responding to these crises, scientists generally do not renounce the paradigm that has led them into crisis. They might lose faith and consider other alternatives, but they generally do not treat anomalies as counter-instances of expected outcomes. They devise numerous articulations and ad hoc modifications of their theory in order to eliminate any apparent conflict. Some scientists, unable to tolerate the crisis and thus unable to live in a world out of joint, leave the profession of science altogether. However, as a rule, persistent and recognized anomaly doesn't actually induce crisis. Failure to achieve the expected solution to a puzzle discredits only the scientists and not the theory. Science is taught to ensure confirmation theory. Kuhn tells us also that science students accept theories on the authority of teacher and text. Because, well, what alternative do they have? Or what competence, what ability to understand? All crises close in one of three ways. The first option is that normal science proves able to handle the crisis-provoking problem and everything returns to normal. In the second instance, the problem resists and is labeled, but it is perceived as having resulted from the field's failure to possess the necessary tools with which to solve it. And so scientists set it aside for a future generation with more developed tools. The third possible resolution exists when a new candidate for paradigm emerges and a battle over its acceptance ensues. These are what we would call paradigm wars. Once it has achieved the status of paradigm, though, a paradigm is declared invalid only if an alternative candidate is available to take its place. This is because there's no such thing as research in the absence of a paradigm. To reject one paradigm without simultaneously substituting another would be to reject science itself. So how do new paradigms finally emerge? Well, some emerge all at once, sometimes in the middle of the night, in the mind of a scientist deeply immersed in crisis. Those who achieve fundamental inventions of a new paradigm have generally been either very young or very new to the field whose paradigm they've changed. Interestingly, much of this process is inscrutable and maybe permanently so. When a transition from a former to alternate paradigm is complete, the profession actually changes its view of the field, its methods, and even its goals. This reorientation has been described as handling the same bundle of data as before, but placing them in a new system of relations with one another by giving them a different framework, or picking up the other end of the stick. Some describe the reorientation as a Gestalt shift. However, Kuhn argues that the Gestalt metaphor is actually misleading. He tells us that scientists do not see something as something else. Instead, they simply see it. The emergence of a new paradigm or theory breaks with one tradition of scientific practice that is perceived to have gone badly astray and introduces a new one conducted under different rules and within a different universe of discourse. The transition to a new paradigm is scientific revolution, and this is the transition from normal to extraordinary research.